Sorry, Commissioner, we're not able to hear you. I think your mic is
My fault, Mr. Peters. I was on mute. Just before we start with the witness evidence, I'd just like to make a very short statement given recent press coverage. Various media articles have been brought to my attention which speculate on findings or recommendations which I might make in my final report. Insofar as these suggest that I have come to any conclusions in relation to findings or recommendations, even on a provisional basis, they are simply wrong. I have neither made any such findings nor drawn any such conclusions and will not do so until I've heard all relevant evidence and considered all relevant submissions. Thank you very much. Mr. Rawat.
Good morning, Commissioner. Our witness today is Mr. Wendell Gaskin. Before we start his evidence, can I introduce the representation here today?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Gaskin has been afforded representation upon your application and your determination as a witness today, and he is represented here by Mr. Stephen Daniels, who appears remotely. There is no representation at the hearing on behalf of the Attorney General and the elected ministers, nor on behalf of the 7 members of the House of Assembly represented by Silk Legal.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Gaskin, I hope you can see and hear me.
I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Can I thank you for making yourself available to give evidence to the Commission today? I know you were scheduled for yesterday, but the timetable issues meant that we didn't reach your evidence, and you very kindly agreed to return today. Are you going to give your evidence on oath or by affirmation?
Affirmation, sir.
Do you have the copy of the affirmation?
I'm sorry, Commissioner. It appears that Mr. Gaskin, his camera view is frozen, and his audio seems to be coming through intermittently.
Okay, is that an issue that you can deal with remotely, Mr. Peters?
Unfortunately not. It may be that Mr. Gaskin is having challenges with his internet connection.
Is it best if we just stop for a few minutes, Mr. Peters, while you try and sort that out with Mr. Gaskin?
Yes, that will be helpful, Commissioner. Thank you.
Well, we'll stop altogether then, and we'll restart once Mr. Gaskin is properly linked in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good, Mr. Gaskin. We can certainly see you, and you're not frozen. Can you hear and see us? And can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. No, that's good. Thank you, Mr. Gaskin, and thank you, Mr. Peters, for sorting that out. Mr. Rowett.
Thank you. Mr. Gaskin, just before we had to pause, you indicated that you would wish to affirm before giving evidence today. Do you have the words of the affirmation with you?
I do, sir.
Would you mind reading them out now for the Commissioner?
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you start by confirming your full name to the Commissioner, please?
My name is Wendell M. Gaskin.
Now, you should have been sent a number of documents by the Commission in advance of today. There are a number of documents that I'd like to take you to, and can I just confirm that you have those with you? The first, go on, you were about to say something.
I don't know. I had gotten some documents from my attorney because I made 3 different requests to your secretary, Rhea, to let her know that the bundles that they keep referring to, I didn't get. So I have documents from my attorney. As a matter of fact, I was able to go up on when you send me the summons on the 2nd of July, I have that information from the Auditor General, and my attorney made some additional documents available to me.
Just give me a moment, please.
Could we just make sure, Mr. Gaskin, through Mr. Rowett, that you have all of the documents that you should have? I mean, that you will need today, just to check.
Yeah, those sitting behind me have confirmed that Mr. Daniels, your attorney, was given the same documents that were also sent directly to you. So there should be no problem. But just the ones that I'd like to take you to are an internal audit unit report of May 2009, which relates to the assistance grants program operated by the House of Assembly. Do you have that?
Hold on, I'm going through my documents.
Page 16.
May 2009?
Yes. If you see some pages at the numbers at the bottom, look for number 60.
Oh, okay. I have that. I have that.
Okay, that's one. There was then a follow-up audit report on the same program, which was in March 2011.
I have that.
Thank you. And then the next document that I want to take you to is the Auditor General's report of the 31st of January 2013 on the Port Development Project.
I have that.
And the last thing, which is probably the largest document, was a bundle related to the Public Accounts Committee's final report on the cruise ship port development project.
That I don't have. The Public Accounts?
Public Accounts Committee.
Yes, I have excerpts.
Right. Well, we'll see how we get on. Hopefully, Mr. Daniels has provided you with all the documents that we sent to him. I see him nodding. So,
point of information.
I'm sorry, you would say something, Mr. Gaskin.
Yes, as I said, I sent 3 requests to your secretary, Rhea. And then when I didn't get any response, I sent to Mr. Chandler, asking him to send me whatever necessary documentation. But I think I have what my attorney has assisted me in getting.
Yes.
So
I understand that there were the requests that you sent were responded to. But in any event, it doesn't matter because the documents that were sent to you were also sent to Mr. Daniels and he confirms he's provided them to you. So
another point of clarification. When I did send the information as to my email, I realized that they were sending them to an email that doesn't exist. So I did make corrections and ask them to send to the proper email. That is also noted in an email, several emails from me.
Oh, I understand that was received, the correction was noted, and the documents were then resent to the right email address. But as I've said, you've received them. So shall we try? We'll try and see how we can get on, shall we?
No problem, sir.
Thank you. Could we start if I could ask you just to give an outline of your professional career in public service, please, Mr. Gaskin.
I started my public service career with the electricity department, which later became the Electricity Corporation. I was able to obtain a scholarship and went off to study accounting, came back and started to work at the Electricity Corporation as the management accountant. And sometime later, I was seconded to the Ministry of Finance as the internal auditor. I was at the Ministry of Finance and I got an offer and went to the US Virgin Islands as the Director of Business Affairs at the legislature on a leave of absence. I came back, went back to the Ministry of Finance in the same position and got promoted up through the Ministry of Finance to the Director of Internal Audit, a position which I served in for quite some time. Then I got promoted again to Deputy Financial Secretary, and I served in that position until I retired. And in 2018, took a job in St. Thomas as a CFO, and now I'm back in the British Virgin Islands.
How long were you director, or when were you made director of the Internal Audit Department?
I can't remember the exact date. I know it was after in 2002 or 3, we had several incidents in the Ministry of Finance. And at that time, under the internal audit, we didn't have any legislation. So therefore, all the powers that the internal audit had came from the powers of the financial secretary. And so therefore, at some point after that investigation, they made recommendation to upgrade the position, and I became Director of Internal Audit, and they made it also a department. So I had a separate department.
Can we give me a moment, sorry. Just starting with the first of the reports that I directed you to earlier, the Assistance Grants Programme, that's the Internal Audit Unit's report of May 2009. If you go to page 65 in that, please.
Page 65. Yeah, page 65.
So that's the front page of
the cover.
Yes. Now, this was an audit of the Assistant Grants Programme run by the House of Assembly. Could you just clarify for us why your internal audit logo has it addressed to the Premier's office?
Well, what had happened is the government had changed, and instead of reporting to the Ministry of Finance, we were then reporting to the Premier's office.
Right. Now, I've gone through this report in detail with the current director of the Internal Audit Department, but in May 2009, were you then in the position of director?
Yes, I was.
If I just take you through to page 75.
I'm at page 75.
You'll see there that the internal audit unit that you were leading makes, it's a total of 10 recommendations overall, well, 12 in fact, I think, no, 10 recommendations about the program. And in short, the internal audit unit was critical of the control framework that was in place at the time for the assistance programs. One of the points you made, if we turn back to 73, page 73.
Page 73. Yeah, go ahead.
You'll see that the point is made that the clerk is to the House of Assembly is the accounting officer for the House, but lacks, in relation to this program, the necessary authority to make expenditure from this subhead without the express consent of the elected representative. And what's written is this. This begs the question, as the accounting officer for the House of Assembly, where does the clerk's responsibility and accountability end? Now, you also, and this is just to give you the context of my questions, Mr. Gaskin, if you go to 78.
Page 78.
Yeah. Do you have it?
Oh, I'm trying to get there. Page 78. Ooh. Yes, I have it.
There, what the internal audit report does is set out the guidelines that were in place at the time that you did the audit in 2009, and it critiques the guidelines and overall the internal audit unit raised concerns over each guideline. Now, first thing is, it wasn't the job of the internal audit unit to determine the merits of the program, was it?
No.
But what you were looking at was whether the processes were robust enough. Would that be a fair way of putting it?
Commissioner, you have to forgive me because this has been so long. I have to wrap my memory around the circumstances of and put this in context. So I believe we can safely assume that.
All right. Well, let me ask for your help with one part of that report, and that's at page 83.
83. I'm at 83.
It's a table which shows the actual disbursement by district and territorial representative between 2006 and 2009. At that time, a district representative had $60,000 a year allocated as part of the grants program, whereas a territorial representative had $75,000. And what the appendix shows is that in the years 2006 through to 2008, there was an overspend by representatives, and they would exceed the allocated amount. Now, in those circumstances where they had exceeded the amount that the budget, if you like. Do you know, and this is perhaps drawing also on your experience as Deputy Financial Secretary, do you know how that shortfall was made good?
I suppose that would be made in a supplementary appropriation from the House of Assembly.
So if the grants
at some later stage.
So if the grants had gone over budget, the mechanism to rectify it would be for the House to make a resolution for a supplementary appropriation to effectively put back the sums so that it was back in credit.
To rectify whatever the issue is.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
But I believe I must say that I spent a number of years as the auditor, the internal auditor, and then the director of internal audit. And I must indicate that during my my tenure, the legislation that we had to depend on was the legislation from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Finance Management Act. So what we would do is to look at whether or not the entity that we were auditing had any legislation and to see whether or not they were in breach of their legislation as well as the Public Finance Management Act.
And presumably you also kept in mind the Public Finance Management Regulations of 2005.
2004, 2005.
Yes, the Act is 2004, isn't it? And the
regulations are 2005.
Now, if you've got the full document, you should have page 129.
Yes, I have 129. That's the cover.
That's the front cover of the follow-up audit.
Yes, it is.
Your unit did in March 2011. If
Yes.
you go through to page 131, if you just turn over to 130, you'll see from the table of contents.
130?
Yeah, you'll see that all 10 recommendations that had been made back in 2009 by your unit had not been implemented. Do you see that in the index?
I'm trying to find it. Second. One, 3, 0, 30, 17, 29. Yes, I have it.
If you look at 130, you'll see it's a table of contents.
Yes, I have it.
And that it shows that all of the recommendations that were made by the internal audit unit in May 2009 had not been implemented. Do you see that?
I see that.
Now, if you go to 131,
yeah, I'm at 131.
can you see the paragraph that begins in performing our follow-up engagement?
I saw that.
It then continues, meetings were held separately with the clerk, the accounting officer, and the deputy clerk of the House of Assembly and other members of staff. The clerk noted that attempts were made to address the weaknesses discovered in the current guidelines. However, this was not accomplished due to lack of cooperation from some members of the Assembly. It's imperative also to note that the clerk in her management response to the report stressed on the importance of adopting clearly defined guidelines that would allow for transparency and consistency in administering the programme with an anticipated completion of 10 months after the issuance of the report. And as you then note, none of the 10 recommendations were implemented. if you go through to 133,
I'm there.
the internal audit unit made follow-up recommendations, including at 1, it's highly recommended that the recommendations provided in the original report be implemented expeditiously. Now I'm going to pause there. As the internal audit unit, you've made follow-up recommendations. Once you've done that, do you have any other power, or did you have any other power at that time, 2011, to try and encourage or enforce recommendations?
The answer to that question is no. But I must say something here, Mr. Howard. Again, this information to me is very old, but it brings me back to the point that I would like to get on the record. The internal audit and the internal auditor was a child of the Ministry of Finance. It first was implemented to take care of all the revenue departments, and it subsequently grew. The issue here is that I found that over the years in my position as the internal auditor and then the director of internal audit, is that nobody liked having to deal with the auditors. It was that position. But what I recognize was that the internal audit unit was set up as a management tool to help accounting officers. And so we made sure that what we try to do is to build trust and a relationship with those accounting officers. So hence, what we always try to make sure that our audit reports had what is called a management report. Once we send a report to the agency, we allow them time to follow up and to correct whatever was stated in those things. So therefore, we recognize that our role wasn't just to go around and hit people over the head with a big stick. Our role was to assist and to continue to assist, because once you build trust, that is what you're going to get. So I believe that I can safely say at that time, we depended on what we had. And so therefore, until 2011, I was able in 2011 to be successful in getting legislation passed, using all the tools that was around me at the time. I depended heavily on the FCO website, especially the National Audit Office. We got information from them as to how to conduct audits, how the standards to use, all those things. But again, as I said, I believe that our job was to assist in any way that we can. And so therefore, once we stated the facts, all we were really interested in promoting is the facts. And once we stated the facts would go someplace else.
If you look at the second recommendation that was made, it was that the advice of the Attorney General be sought in relation to a perceived conflict between, which arose, and this was what I drew your attention to earlier, where the accounting officer, although responsible for the budget, didn't have authority over the assistant grant subhead. And so I think that the difficulty that the internal audit unit had identified was that it was the members that decided how the budget should be spent, but it was the clerk to the House that was, as the accounting officer, that had the statutory responsibility. Following that recommendation, do you know whether any advice was sought from the Attorney General?
I'm not sure.
The third recommendation, if we deal with it, is you recommended that the clerk, you drew effectively attention to the obligations under the Public Finance Management Act of 2004 and the regulations of 2005. And that was presumably, again, because of the importance of the role of the accounting officer. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
Now, if you go back to 63 in that.
63.
Should be right at the start of it all.
Yeah, I have it. I have it.
You should have a letter. It should be a letter dated the 19th of May, 2011.
I do have it.
And it's from the speaker, the then Speaker of the House, Roy Harrigan, addressed to you. And it relates to the Assistant Grants Programme and your follow-up audit. And I'll try and summarize. Firstly, that Mr. Harrigan expressed concern that the Internal Audit Unit had conducted an audit of the accounts of the House of Assembly rather than the Auditor General. And the point was raised that your unit didn't have authority to do what it had done. The second was, and this was that what's recorded is that in 2005, the Assistant Grant Programme was expanded to include persons experiencing certain hardships. Along with this expansion, members felt they have a good idea of what happens in the community. Members reported that they use their discretion to give funds after hearing from the applicants. Their resolve is that this discretion must be left to the elected members. Furthermore, members said they are at a loss to perceive what mischief is being corrected by the recommendations in the report. And the next paragraph reads, there is a general sentiment among members that there is no impropriety as far as they are concerned, and that the Assistant Grant Programme is being handled the way they want it done. According to members, the Assistant Grant Programme must be kept simple and not complicated or encumbered by a lot of paperwork. However, members are aware that there will come a time when the programme will have to be overhauled, but until that time, they will continue to have the allowances and give assistance in the usual way. Now you replied, and your reply is at page 60.
I have that.
It's a lengthy reply, and it's dated May the 27th, 2011. And again, if I'm going to try and summarize it, but if I take it too shortly and there's a point you wish to draw to the attention of the Commissioner, please do so, Mr. Gaskin. But if we start at the beginning, the first point you make is that, and you say, you respectfully point this out, that the letter written to you should be written by the clerk of the House rather than the Speaker, because the Speaker doesn't have any constitutional or legal responsibilities relative to those matters. And so your point was that this was a program where because the clerk to the House was the accounting officer, it was for the clerk to the House to deal, for example, with the management response, as indeed she did, and any follow-up correspondence. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You then go on to explain the establishment of the Internal Audit Unit, explaining that it was established since 1991, and in the absence of legislation had been operating under the authority of the Minister of Finance, the Chief Minister, and at the time the audit was conducted and the report authored, the Honourable Premier. And you go on the next page to set out that your department now had a statutory basis, because by then the Internal Audit Act of 2011 had come into force. And for that reason, what you do is you explain that actually the purpose of the audit was not to audit the accounts of the House of Assembly, but rather that what you were doing was auditing this particular program. That was the task that was set to the Internal Audit Unit, wasn't it?
Commissioner, the Internal Audit Unit had what is called an audit committee and had a what we would normally do is to draw audit plan would decide all the areas in which we would audit, take it to the audit committee, and the audit committee would then decide. I believe that my letter is clear, having gone back to those times, that my letter is clear. Took some time sitting down to try to put this together at that time. And I also want to indicate to the commissioner that when I was doing this job, I felt that the reason why I was chosen for this job is because I had a certain level of independence. I did not allow, whether it was a government minister or any politician, anybody, to decide what we would work on. We work fairly independently, looking at trying to protect the interests of the government.
And Mr. Gaskin, the Internal Audit Act was passed at the beginning of 2011. It's referred to at the top of page 61, the dates.
Yes.
Were you sort of instrumental or a pressure in getting that act passed?
I was instrumental in getting that act passed. I nursed that act like a baby, like someone was carrying a pregnancy. I had several attempts, and I want to say, if my memory serves me right, that I had the assistant of the then Chief Minister, Honorable Ralph T. O'Neill, in ushering this piece of legislation to fruition. The problem that we were having is that people were questioning whether or not we had the authority. And so I found that we could no longer survive by just using the Financial Management Act and the powers of the Financial Secretary. So therefore, we had to have our own piece of legislation. And I followed through that piece of legislation, just like when our mother was carrying a child.
No, I understand. Thank you very much.
Just picking up on that, you would have been the first director of the Internal Audit Department. Is that right, Mr. Gaskin?
Yes, sir.
And you obviously led the unit and then the department for a number of years. One of the point that Mrs. Correa, when she gave her evidence, and she's the current director, one of the points she made in evidence was that it was not unusual to encounter resistance from the departments or bodies that you were auditing. And by that, she meant that people were slow to provide evidence. Was that, or provide the documents that you needed as an auditor to see? Was that also your experience during your time as the Internal Audit Director?
Yes, Commissioner. But as I said before, one of the things that I realized is that no matter where we go, people are not going to like the auditors. As a matter of fact, we had such times when the auditors were resented. We had to find another strategy in which to deal with those agencies. So what we did, we offered our services to assist in any way that we can. We assist them with trying to put systems in place to help them do their work properly, because what you have is people as accounting officers may have very good administrative skills, but they don't have financial skills. So what we did was we made the internal audit unit and later department available to any accounting officer that was having any problem. Again, our job, what I found in my role as the director of internal audit, is that my job wasn't to hit people over the head and to have gotcha moment. That's not what audit is about. Audit is to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do, but if we can help, we used to help. That's why I said to you before, every audit that we have done, internal audit, you find that there's a management response. Sometimes it took a while. When we found that it took several months and we could no longer, the year was coming to a close, we could no longer put up with such action, we wrote back and finalized the audit report. We're always going to have resistance because nobody, I don't care who it is, nobody likes the auditors. The problem that you have to build trust. And so when you build trust, then people start to give you information and they start to respond. Remember that we are a small country, and a lot of things are new to us. The internal audit experience was a new one. I had the distinct pleasure of being the first internal auditor in the BVI. I said to myself, it was a learning experience and I took on the task. But one of the things that I can remember that a senior civil servant said to me one day, Mr. Gaskin, nobody is interested in your opinions. What we are interested is in the facts. I took that as my learning, and I went back to my office and I spoke with my officers and I said, all we are going to be interested in is the facts. We are not going to put our opinion in these documents. We just want the facts.
Yes, thank you.
If we look at, we're still on page 61, just look at the third paragraph.
61.
It's still your letter. What you say at the third paragraph is contrary to the members' assertions that disbursements from the funds are discretionary. This assertion is invalid since disbursements should be guided by the guidelines produced by the House of Assembly. Please refer to the note provided in the Appropriation Act. Another misconception that must be addressed is that the members are of the stance that the report was produced to highlight the mischief being perpetrated by them through the programme. As a practice, this office endeavours to conduct its engagements objectively and unbiased, report the facts as found, and offer recommendations that add value or improve the processes. Furthermore, this office have not and will never attempt to dictate to any accounting officer how to manage their finances. What we do is offer sound advice on the effective management of such in compliance with our financial management laws. We have again reviewed our reports and are too at a loss to how the members deduced from their contents that we are making recommendations to correct some mischief being perpetrated by them. I'm going to pause there. I just want to go back to that reference to the note provided in the Appropriation Act. Could you just clarify what that refers to, please?
So again, I am lost because I don't have that information. So whatever the note was, we cited that note.
But can you help us in general terms? Does that mean that in terms of the assistance grants as an aspect of the budget, that would be dealt with in the Appropriation Act?
Yes, it would be in the Appropriation Act, and it would come under the budget for the House of Assembly, and then the speaker, the clerk of the House of Assembly would be the accounting officer. And again, I believe, if my memory serves me right, that would set the purpose of what the grant is supposed to be for.
See, and so that would be a note that accompanies the act, would set out the purpose.
The purpose.
You then go on in your letter. The most troubling aspect of your letter is that the members believe that the assistant grant program is being handled the way they, the members, want it done. We staunchly disagree, as the disbursement of public funds is governed by the Public Finance Management Act and regulations. Although the law does not explicitly bind members of the House, the accounting officer of the House of Assembly who approves the disbursement is bound by the standards set forth therein. Section 21(2) of the Public Finance Management Act 2004 expressly states that accounting officers are personally accountable for public funds received, collected, or dispersed from monies appropriated. In addition, the accounting officer, according to Section 73 of the Public Finance Management Regulations 2005 as amended, must certify the accuracy of disbursements, in addition to ensuring that they are adequately supported. We are at a quandary to comprehend what is meant when you said that the assistant grant program must be kept simple and not complicated or encumbered by a lot of paperwork. We're not suggesting that the process be overly complicated or cumbersome. What we are advocating is that there should be a minimum standard of documentation to support disbursements from public funds. We're just asking that the House of Assembly, in administering the program, maintain sufficient documentation to promote transparency and accountability, which are fundamental principles of good governance, a responsibility for which the members should lead. And are you not there, though, Mr. Gaskin, highlighting that a fundamental difficulty with the way the program was being operated, and that is this tension between the fact that the members had control over the budget, but it was the clerk to the House as the accounting officer who was legally responsible for accounting for that budget?
Yes, sir.
And she, despite having the title accounting officer, was not the person that would decide how sums would be spent. That was for somebody else, but she just had to account for them.
So neither the director of internal audit or even the clerk for that matter can dictate to the members of the House of Assembly how they want money spent when that money is given to them. It is up to them. That's their prerogative. They're the ones that are elected to office. Those people have to give account back to their constituents. What we are supposed to do is to do our part, which from the internal audit standpoint is to make make sure that all the necessary procedures are followed, and the clerk at the House of Assembly is to verify those documents before they go to the Treasury for payment.
And let's finish with the last paragraph of your letter to the then Speaker, Mr. Harrigan. Said in closing, it would be enlightening to know what conditions must exist that would warrant an overhaul of the assistant grant program. Would it not be more prudent to correct the issues as identified by being proactive rather than reactive? We hope that this letter is received with the sentiment in which it is sent, and that it clarifies any misconception that the members may have as it relates to our authority and to the audit of the assistant grants program. It is our hope that the recommendations provided will now be accepted and implemented. I take it that there wasn't any further correspondence because you would have attached it to the reports. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And once it has reached that point, from the point of view of the internal audit department, you move on to the next audit, and you would only perhaps come back to this program if it were part of your audit plan.
At some later stage, sir.
But stepping back from that and drawing on your time as director of the internal audit department, did you see the work of that department as being critical to good governance?
Yes, sir. I always saw that the internal audit, again, as I said, it was a management tool, and it is a management tool. And part of the responsibility in a growing society such as ours is to try to help build capacity where there's none.
And in order to perform that task, is it important that you be seen as independent?
It is very important that you be seen as independent.
Could we turn to a different topic, please? And that is the port development project.
No problem.
Was this in draft?
That's in the Auditor General's Bundle Part 1 at page 619.
Which one you want me to go to?
Have you got the Auditor General's report first?
Yes, I have that. I must tell you, the first time I'm seeing this audit report was July 2nd, 2021.
Yes, I think when you, in 2014, when you appeared before the Public Accounts Committee, you made the point that you hadn't seen that report at that time.
And again, as I said before, the first time I'm seeing the report was July 2nd, 2021.
Well, what we will do is probably move between that report and the Public Accounts Committee bundle that we sent you, because that bundle contains not just the Public Accounts Committee's report, but also the record, the minute of the evidence that you gave to the Public Accounts Committee.
No problem, sir.
So just, obviously, the reason for asking you about this is that at the time, and as and this is a process that was going on between 2011, from 2011 through to 2013. That was at a time when you were Deputy Financial Secretary, wasn't it?
I became Deputy Financial Secretary, I think, in November of 2011, I'm sure. And
as in that role, according to what was recorded by the Public Accounts Committee, and this was in evidence before them, you were identified as chairing the Central Tenders Board. Is that right?
That is correct.
And also, one of the roles you had as Deputy Financial Secretary was to sit on the BVI Ports Authority Board as the ex officio representative of the Ministry of Finance.
No, let me clarify something first. Any powers that I had as Deputy Financial Secretary was powers delegated to me by the Financial Secretary. The Financial Secretary or his designee. I became chairman of the Public Tender Committee because the law says, if you look at the Public Finance Management Act, 170, part 27, it gives you the whole rundown there. It tells you that the Financial Secretary is a member of the Public Tender Committee or his designate. That's how I became. So any powers that I had was delegated to me. Also, on in regards to sitting and as on the port meetings, it was I would go when the Financial Secretary could not go.
Just breaking that down, you've said that you chaired the Public Tenders Committee. One of the features of the Public Accounts Committee report is that terms seem to be used a little interchangeably. Is the Public Tenders Committee the same thing as the Central Tenders Board?
It is.
Now, the reason I asked you about whether you were an ex officio member, and I can take you to the page if you want, but in the minute of your evidence before the Public Accounts Committee, you were asked whether you attended board meetings at the BVI Ports Authority on behalf of the Financial Secretary, who is an ex officio member of the board. And you were recorded as responding in the affirmative and stating that at the Ministry of Finance, there was split representation on statutory boards. So while the Financial Secretary sits on the BVI Airport Authority Board, you represent the Financial Secretary on the BVI Ports Authority Board, and you indicated that you had attended approximately 90% of the Port Authority Board meetings. That's what you said back in 2014. So that obviously your memory was probably much clearer about what you were up to then, but that would seem right, wasn't it? That you would have been the lead representative for the Ministry of Finance on the Port Authority Board.
Yes,
Now, if you look at that report from the Auditor General and go to page 622, please.
622. Mine don't have those numbers.
I think you're looking at the wrong report, Mr. Gaskin. You're looking at the Public Accounts Committee report. There's a separate report from the Auditor General on the port development project.
I have the public, oh,
Yes, so if you'll need to keep that close by, and then you'll need to find the port development project report, which is from the Auditor General. And that has if I put up the front cover, you'll see what that looks like.
this is what I have.
Right, you need a second report.
I don't have the second report. I have this.
Well, if I could just ask Mr. Daniels whether that Auditor General report was sent to you.
What happened, Mr. Rawat, is that you would have indicated to Mr. Gaskin that you would be dealing with the Public Account Committee's final report on the cruise ship port development project. That was the first matter that you would have sent to him.
Yes.
And then subsequently, you sent two other matters that you wish him to assist you with, which are the Assistant Grants Program between 2006 to 2008, that is found at page 60, and the House of Assembly Assistant Grant Program Follow-up Audit Review, that is found at page 554. So no mention was made to Mr. Gaskin with respect to that Port Authority matter that you have indicated to him a moment ago.
My understanding from those who sit behind me was that the last thing to be sent to Mr. Gaskin and to yourself was the Public Accounts Committee report, because that is a substantial document, because it's not just the report. All the minutes of the committee were sent that have been provided to the Commission were also provided, as well as other documents. In advance of that being sent, the Port Development Project report was also sent, as well as the two reports that you've received. But I mean, the point is we are where we are, Mr. Daniels, and it's a question of making sure that Mr. Gaskin has a report that we need to take him to.
I'm not sure whether he would have it, because we would have restricted our bundles to the 3 items that you would have mentioned.
Well, he hasn't got it.
He hasn't got it, so we need to find a way of getting it to him.
Can that be sent to him?
Yes.
It could be sent to him directly now, please. And
Yes, I mean, what I suggest is we've been going an hour, Mr. Rawat. We have a stenographer who is working away. What I suggest is we have a 5-minute break, Mr. Gaskin, Mr. Daniels.
that would be useful.
During that 5 minutes, we'll send the report to both of you, but also that will enable the stenographer to have a break too. Yes, we'll come back in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
No problem.
Good. Thank you both very much. Good. Mr. Gaskin, could you just confirm that you now have the Auditor General's report?
I have Office of dated 31 January 2013.
That's the one.
That's it. Thank you very much, Mr. Gaskin. Mr. Howard.
If you turn to page 622, Mr. Gaskin. Do you have it? Mr. Gaskin, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I think your screen froze for a moment. If you look at 622 at paragraph 11.
Paragraph 11.
This is a part of the Auditor General's report where she's setting out the history of efforts that were made to develop the cruise ship pier on Wickham's Quay. And paragraph 11 appears just under a heading of Disney proposal. So there were discussions with Royal Caribbean and Disney for the expansion of the pier in 2009, which then followed in 2011 with further talks with Disney, and ultimately a non-binding agreement. At the time that these discussions were going on with Disney, were you attending BVI Port Authority board meetings?
No, sir.
So if you look at the bottom of paragraph 15, heads of terms was signed on 11th of October 2011. So that was before you took on the role of Deputy Financial Secretary, is that right?
That is correct.
So we see at paragraph 17 that the non-binding agreement was subsequently terminated. And what happens if you go through to paragraph 19?
Yes.
Was that the Ministry of Communication and Works took on the project and they began to take forward the project. This was in 2011. Now, and obviously after the termination of the Disney discussions and the Disney agreement, from the time that you were Deputy Financial Secretary, did you then begin to attend Board Authority meetings, or Port Authority board meetings rather?
I can't recall that, Commissioner, because I think it's kind of unfair to ask me, the first I'm seeing this document, that's number one. Number two, the cruise pier that we presently have out there has nothing to do to me with what is happening here, because it was 3 phases from my understanding. The first phase was a unsolicited proposal. I think that's where they're talking about Disney. The second phase was where there was a 10 was expression of interest, and then the third phase is where the government actually took control of and decided to finance and build this cruise pier. So I am, at a loss. I can't say.
Well, the reason I asked you was that you, firstly, you confirmed that you said earlier that this report from the Auditor General, that the first time you'd seen it was on the 2nd July 2020.
2021.
2021, of course, yes. So you then so that you confirmed that you'd received it before this hearing. You also, as you will appreciate from the Public Accounts Committee report and its findings, previously gave evidence to a committee of Parliament about this project. You were on the board at the time that this project happened, and you were, as once we go through the reports, also involved in the process. That's why you've been called, and that's why we're asking for your help.
I think
It appears again, Commissioner, that Mr. Gaskin is frozen.
yes.
I will get him on the phone to see if we can get this rectified quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peters.
Is it better now?
Yes, we have you back, Mr. Gaskin.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Gaskin. We can see and hear you again. Thank you very much, Mr. Rawat.
And so my question was whether you were, having been appointed Deputy Financial Secretary in November 2011, were you sitting or attending board meetings at the time that the project was taken over by the Ministry of Communication and Works?
Commissioner, to be quite fair, I don't remember. I know that part of my responsibilities as Deputy Financial Secretary and the responsibilities delegated to me by the then Financial Secretary. I don't know when I started to attend those board meetings. I don't think it was right after I got there.
Was it during the course of 2012?
I would believe so.
If you look at 625 in the Auditor General's report.
625?
Yeah. Concern that is raised by the Auditor General's report in relation to the actions of the Ministry of Communication and Works is that the board was excluded from the process and reduced simply to endorsing decisions that had been made by the ministry, and they were then given instructions to take certain steps. And you'll see that conclusion at paragraph 40, which is at 626.
40.
So the Auditor General says, in effect, the role of the Port Authority was reduced to endorsing decisions already made by the ministry. In excluding the authority from the decision-making process, the ministry failed to avail itself of the experience and knowledge residing in the management and board of the authority. And if you go back to 36, you'll see there that the Auditor General sets out instructions that were given to the board from the ministry. For example, requiring it to issue a resolution for the authority to enter into agreement with Tortola Port Partners, requiring it to execute an agreement for a credit of $3 million for purchasing piles. Now, you'll see that at 36 Roman numeral 3, there's a reference to July 2012 there. So if I take you to the PAC report, do you have page 401 of that?
401. Which PAC report?
Well,
you mean the minutes of the meeting?
yes.
I don't have my pages numbered that way, but I have what I have is the meeting held on Wednesday the 15th, 2014.
Right. Is that the one where you Wednesday 15th of January 2014, where you attended before the committee?
Yes, I have that.
Right. Okay. Well, if you go to line 37 on that.
37. Yeah, line 37.
So it begins, the Deputy Financial Secretary indicated.
I am seeing that, sir.
Right. Well, can you take you to the middle of it? You said to the committee that the Ministry of Finance became involved in the project long after it had begun, and that the Ministry of Communication and Works were the ones who'd been dealing with it. And it continues, he, and that's you, indicated that on the 23rd of April 2012, the government of the British Virgin Islands signed the protocols for effective management, which outlined the process for how capital projects, including public/private partnerships, should be handled. He explained that at the time, the Ministry of Communications had gone full speed ahead with the project and did not adhere to the process outlined in the protocols. He further explained that in August 2012, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office stepped in, and it was then that the project came to the Ministry of Finance for procurement. He indicated the requests for proposals had been sent to persons of interest, and that these RFPs had been sent out to ask persons to bid on the project when the information had been put together. I'll come back to that last point, but if you go through then to 40 and 41.
Which page is this in the bundle, Mr. Rao?
That's at page 402.
40 and 41.
We see that. You were asked at 40 by the chairman of the PAC whether the Ministry of Communications and Works had been full speed ahead with the project without consulting with the BVI Ports Authority. And you stated at 41, that, and I'll quote this, he was unsure if that had been the case and noted he was just saying that the Ministry of Communication and Works had been handling the project. So
yes.
Taking what I've read to you from the Auditor General's report, her concern that the board had not been properly involved, and the evidence that you gave about the Ministry of Communication Works being full speed ahead, does it follow, or is it right that the Ministry of Communication and Works did in fact take over the project from the Port Authority?
Can you repeat your question?
I've taken you to the Auditor General's report where she raises...
Yes, where she raised those concerns.
I then took you to the explanation you gave to the committee, the synopsis you gave of what you could remember. And then you were asked by the chairman about whether there had been consultation with the Ports Authority, and I've taken you to your answer.
And I said I was unsure if that's what the document is saying.
Well, let's break that down a little, because I think you gave your answer before I had taken you to everything. Okay. So looking at everything, you were the person from the Ministry of Finance attending board meetings. Is it your recollection that the Ministry of Communication and Works effectively took over the project from the Ports Authority?
I can't recall that.
What you do say is that the Ministry of Communications and Works had not adhered to the process outlined in the protocols, and that's the protocols for effective management. Can you remember in what way that ministry had not adhered to the protocols?
Commissioner, this is a long time. This is the process that I am trying to go back in the recesses of my memory, so I don't misquote gave false information. So as to this point, I can safely say, based on the information that is here in front of me, at that time, that was the information that I gave in regards to what is here in the minutes. I can't recall the circumstances or anything around it.
So all you can confirm is that in 2014, you told the Public Accounts Committee that the ministry had not adhered to the protocols, but you can't now remember in what way they had not adhered.
I can't remember the context, sir.
If you look, sticking with the minutes of your evidence, if you look at 43, which Commissioner is on your page 402.
Yes.
You told the Public Accounts Committee that the BVI Port Authority Board had been asked to do certain things with regard to the project, one of which had been to purchase piles and had been approved by the board. You further stated that when the new government took office, the chairman of the board had resigned and a new chairman, Mr. Gregory Adams, had been appointed. You indicated that you were unsure what had been discussed, but disclosed that on several occasions, the board had been asked to pass resolutions for certain things relating to the project. And you indicated that the board did not handle the project yourselves. If you go back to, I think it's, if you go back to, we'll leave that. But if you, what you also say, and this is at if you carry on, sorry, I'll find it and I'll give you the paragraph. If you go at 273, which is Commissioner at your 433, this is again still in the evidence that you gave. Do you have it, Mr. Gaskin?
Yes, but I'm trying to find where you are, sir.
Where I am is it's still in the minute.
Yes.
It's a page 39 and point 273.
273. Yes, I'm at 273.
At 273, the member for the first district asked whether the board had been the ones to decide that they wanted to move ahead with obtaining the piles, or if the board had been told that the piles should be obtained and had to ensure that parameters were in place to protect the government. You then said, and what's recorded at 274 is in reference to the member's question, the Deputy Financial Secretary indicated that it was the latter and noted that the board had wanted to ensure that everything was in place to ensure the government had been getting value for money. He stated that the piles would have had to be made to certain specifications. If we go to the next page, in the minute of your evidence to the Public Accounts Committee at 281, you refer to a briefing that had been held by the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Communication and Works. Now, I've taken those hopefully to try and assist your recollection, Mr. Gaskin, and I appreciate it is some time ago. But the reason to refer you to reference to the piles is because that also appears in the Auditor General's report, and I took that to you to that earlier. But it does seem, doesn't it, firstly, that from what you told the Public Accounts Committee in 2014, was that the board was receiving briefings from the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Communications and Works. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And secondly, at least in relation,
the permanent secretary, in my recollection, is also ex officio member of that board.
but was those briefings being given by the permanent secretary as a member of the board or as the permanent secretary?
I can't recall that, sir.
And in reference to the purchasing of piles, which was for $3 million, according to the Auditor General, it does seem from what you said to the Public Accounts Committee was that was effectively an instruction to the board, wasn't it?
Which number are you referring to?
You go back to 273, please.
273. Yes.
This was a question that you were asked by the member for the first district. And that was whether the board had wanted to move ahead with obtaining the piles, or if the board had been told the piles should be obtained. And what you said was, you indicated it was the latter. So you indicated to the member for the first district that the board had been told the piles should be obtained. Which would suggest, wouldn't it, that the board had been given an instruction to pay for the piles?
Commissioner, I am not sure how we deduce that, but that probably would be because the minister for the subject had the authority to make those decisions.
Again, given the passage of time, it is the position, Mr. Gaskin, that you can't add any more detail.
I can't add any more detail.
Okay. All right. Well,
but is it fair to say from your last answer, Mr. Gaskin, because I understand it was a long time ago and you can't give any more detail, but it wouldn't surprise you because the minister had the authority to make that decision?
It wouldn't surprise me.
No, thank you very much.
If you could, so I'm sorry to make you jump around in this document, Mr. Gaskin, but if you go back in the minute to item 45.
45.
Your page 403.
No problem.
But paragraph 45.
Paragraph 45, yes.
Thank you.
45. Yes. I'm there.
Right. What you said there, and to give it context, what paragraph 44, which is on the previous page, says is that the member for the first district inquired about whether it had been a breach of the statute/acts that governs the BVI PA board for them not to be the ones handling the project. And what you said was the Deputy Financial Secretary stated that under the Ministry of Communications and Works, all of the BVI PA capital projects had to be approved by Cabinet through the ministry. He further stated that based on the financing and the way the project was supposed to go, and especially with it being a public/private partnership, the project would have had to be a central government project because the outside parties could not have made a deal with the BVI PA by themselves. He indicated that the BVI PA is a statutory body within the central government. I just wondered whether you could or develop that response and just give some further explanation to what you were referring to when you said that to the Public Accounts Committee.
I believe I was referring to the fact that the protocols that were signed in April of 2012 indicated that when you have a private public partnership, that would have to be the central government putting all the necessary stuff in place rather than to deal with a statutory board. Because remember, they, if my memory serves me correct, the protocols for effective management indicated to us the responsibility of the central government to the statutory boards. The Port Authority is one of those statutory board that based on the, I think it was the weighted average or whatever it was, that the central government would have to be the one making all those necessary arrangements. I think that was the context. I am not sure. I don't want to, again, mislead anybody or give any false information, because I believe that everybody wants to make sure that we follow the rules of the COI, but I don't want to give any false information. But I believe that was the context in which I was making those statements. Again, my memory doesn't allow me to elaborate any further.
Well, Mr. Gaskin, that's helpful. And what's important is that you don't speculate or guess.
No.
If you can't develop an answer or you can't answer a question, it's better for the commission if you make that clear rather
That's
than
no problem.
speculate. But
No
if
problem.
we are going to jump between documents. If I take you back to the Auditor General's report at 626, please.
1 second. 626.
Yes.
I'm there.
Can you see the heading independent legal review?
Yes, sir.
And what's said by the Auditor General is that throughout the process, and the process we're at now is that period of time when the Ministry of Communication and Works is dealing with the project. The Attorney General's chambers were consulted for clarification and legal advice with respect to the government's interests. Now, whilst you were sitting on the board, do you recall being aware that advice was being taken from the Attorney General's chambers?
I can't recall, sir.
What you'd said, do you remember when we were looking at that, paragraph 45 in the minute? One of the points you made to the Public Accounts Committee was that outside parties could not make a deal with the Port Authority by themselves. If you look at 43 in the, or just look at 42, in 42 in the Attorney General's report, the Auditor General's report, I did this all the time. The Auditor General's report refers to that in June 2012, the Financial Secretary sought independent legal advice from specialists in the field of public-private partnerships. And a team of lawyers from Baker and McKenzie reviewed the proposed project development agreement, the heads of understanding, and the ground lease that had been drafted for execution by the authority, that's the Ports Authority, and the developer. At 43, what's set out is that review raised a number of concerns, including at Roman numeral 6, failure of the agreements to give the authority approval rights for the initial design and any changes. And then on the next page, if you go over, at Roman numeral 13, failure to make provision for the authority to be a party to the berthing agreement. Now, that appears to suggest that it was contemplated that the Ports Authority would need to enter into legal agreements with the developer. Was that your understanding at the time? That there might be some legal agreements that the Port Authority itself would have to enter into?
Again, sir, I'm not sure.
Now, the next sort of big event in this project was that the Ministry of Finance took over from the Ministry of Communications and Works. Now, and I can take you this if you need to see it, but if you go back to the minute that we were looking at, and you go to paragraph 35, that's at page 401 for your note, Commissioner.
35.
Yeah. What you told the Public Accounts Committee at 35 was that you had been very familiar with the Cruise Pier project, and you informed the committee that within the Ministry of Finance, you had responsibility for the Cruise Pier project, whereas the Financial Secretary had responsibility for the airport project. Now, in terms of the sort of responsibility you were exercising over the Cruise Pier project, once the Ministry of Finance took over, what was your role at that point?
My role would have been any responsibilities that were delegated to me by the Financial Secretary. And that's where I fit in. I had no authority of my own. Again, this 35 says, stated that the committee, that he had a responsibility. That was delegated responsibility to me to sit in on with this Cruise Pier project, because the Financial Secretary was handling another project at the same time, I believe.
But I mean, you say it's delegated responsibility, and
yes,
I can understand that. But what was your role? What was your job? What did you do in relation to the project?
Attend the meetings and to make sure that I stayed finance position when the opportunity arrived.
In your evidence to the Public Accounts Committee, you referred to being on a steering committee. Was that committee? Was that the committee that was set up to take the project forward once the Ministry of Finance took over?
Wait, which section are you referring to, sir?
If you go to paragraph 47 in your
in a minute,
403.
Yeah.
Do you see where you say
yes, 47.
You're aware of when the Ministry of Finance has been involved and of what is happening currently as you're a member of the steering committee? I just wanted to know whether you remember what the steering committee was for.
If you look, I am not sure. Because if you read 46, 48, the member of the second said that the deputy knew whether the decision to continue with the project had been made. So it appears to me there that something is missing, whether the project was stopped and then 49 again said the Deputy Financial Secretary stated that he was unsure if a decision had been made to continue the project. So I'm totally at a loss here.
What my question was whether you remember what the steering committee was for.
No, sir.
I'm sorry, this is the court reporter. We're hearing some static on Mr. Gaskin's line.
Can you hear me better now?
I can hear you clearly, but there's static interfering with your voice. So I'm not sure if the headset needs to be taken out and put back in.
You want me to do that?
I think so.
No
Mr.
problem.
Peters, am I right?
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's much better now. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Gaskin.
Yes, sir.
If I take you back to the Auditor General's report, please, Mr. Gaskin, at page 628.
Page 628. Page 628. Yes, sir.
This is the portion of the report that dealing with the procurement process that was initiated by the Ministry of Finance. So can you see at 47, there's reference to execution of heads of understanding and commencement of preliminary activity on the development project being halted. That was the point at which the involvement of the Ministry of Communication Works ended. And then at 48, it says the Ministry of Finance published on its website a request for expressions of interest dated 31st of July. And the paragraphs then set out what that request wanted. But if you look at 51, you'll see that there was an initial closing date for the expression of interest of 16th August 2012, which was then extended twice, first to the 28th of August 2012, and then later to the 12th of September 2012. What the Auditor General records is that aside from it being published on the Ministry of Finance website, the request for expression of interest was published firstly in a Canada-based publication and then in 3 local publications. If you go to 52, at the last part of 52, the Auditor General notes that no evidence was found to support assertions that the tender was also advertised in the Wall Street Journal. And that observation is preceded by that the publications above provided a submission period of less than 2 weeks for a project envisaged to cost between $50 million and $75 million. And this process, as we see at 54, resulted in 3 submissions. And it was a process of which the Public Accounts Committee was also critical. Can you remember now why such a short period was allowed for potential tenderers to make submissions for what on any view would have been a complex, long-term and high-value project?
No, sir, I can't recall.
Was there any reason at all that you can remember as to why the Ministry of Finance considered necessary to set such a short period?
I believe that would be a question that you would have to ask the financial secretary. I believe that was above my pay grade.
And just to explain that a little bit more, please. You've explained that you operate as someone designated by the financial secretary.
Yes.
You've also explained that you were taking the lead on the cruise pier project, whilst the financial secretary was involved in the airports project. So do you have any recollection yourself as to what your thoughts were at the time as to the period that was applied?
No, sir.
If you go to 57 in the Auditor General's report,
I'm there.
What the Auditor General notes is that the intention was to have the process expedited to accommodate an early construction schedule. However, the provisions in the invitation for expression of interest mirrored the previously accepted proposal from Tortola Port Partners to a considerable extent, which may have created an unfair advantage. To give you context, Mr. Gaskin, when the Ministry of Communication and Works were running the project, they had reached a point when they had effectively entered into an agreement with Tortola Port Partners. And the concern that is raised by the Auditor General is that this creates seeking submissions which mirror, based on an invitation that mirrors a previously accepted proposal, would have given that company an unfair advantage. And it was a criticism that was also made by the Public Accounts Committee, who said that it created an unfair bias and rendered other prospective tenderers at an immediate and severe disadvantage. Can you remember now why the invitation was formulated in such a way?
No, sir, I can't remember.
The process, if we look at 54 and 55, in terms of the response to the invitation for expressions of interest, was firstly that you, as it says at 53, you had 3 proposals received. These came from GLF Construction Corporation, Tortolo Port Partners, and Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited, /DECO. They were reviewed for responsiveness by a committee chaired by the Deputy Financial Secretary and comprising of representatives from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Labour, Ministry of Communication and Works, and the Public Works Department. After which all 3 developers were invited to submit tenders by 11th October 2012, of which 2 were subsequently received. Again, just stopping there. So that's a committee which you appear to have chaired. Can you explain what process was used to put together that committee?
Sir, I believe this is making reference to the public tender committee.
Well, before you confirm that, look at 55, Mr. Gaskin.
Yeah.
Because you now have a stage where the committee you chaired have reviewed submissions in responding to an invitation of interest. At 55, you receive 3 submissions, 2 then submit tenders, and the tenderers are invited to make presentations to a committee formed for the purpose of negotiating the terms of a PPP agreement. The committee's membership included the Financial Secretary, Baker & McKenzie as a law firm, Price Waterhouse of Trinidad and Tobago, together with the chairman of the BVI Port Authority, representatives of the Attorney General Chambers and the Ministry of Communication and Works. There's no reference to you there.
Because again, so as I said, all the authority that I had in regards to this project came when the financial secretary could not attend. I attended in his stead. So therefore, there's no reference to me there because I wasn't there.
Yes, but there is obviously, as I said, there's a reference to you in 54. I'm just trying to ask you if you can remember how that committee came about.
No, sir.
What you, if you go back to your minute of the evidence that you gave to the committee, to the Public Accounts Committee, and Commissioner, it's at page 407.
And which paragraph?
Paragraph 79, please.
79. $79. I'm there.
What you've said there is you indicated you'd been involved in the phase of the project where Mr. Claude Skelton-Klein had been appointed to be the managing director of the BVI Ports Authority. You stated the cabinet had made a decision to appoint a negotiation committee and noted that the financial secretary had been appointed the chairman. He further stated that he'd not be on the committee because he'd already been the chairman of the Public Tenders Committee. He explained that at times the financial secretary is absorbed in a number of matters and noted that the decision been made to have Mr. Claude Skelton-Klein act in his place whenever he could not make it. Just breaking that down, do you remember when what we have on the basis of the Auditor General's report is 2 committees, don't we? One to consider the submissions, which you chaired, and the second one, which considered the tender, had 2 tenders and which was chaired by the financial secretary. Is that second committee chaired by the financial secretary the negotiation committee that you're referring to there?
Can you repeat your question? Are you asking me if that second committee was chaired by the financial secretary?
Well, linking the 2 together, you have 2 committees, don't you, according to the Auditor General? That's what I told you to.
According to the Auditor General.
There's two committees. You're not on the second committee, are you?
No, sir.
And what you told the Public Accounts Committee in 2014 was that there was a negotiation committee chaired by the Financial Secretary, which you could not be on because you were chairman of the Public Tenders Committee. And my question is whether the negotiation committee, or whether you agree that the negotiation committee is the committee, that the second committee that the Auditor General is referring to.
Based on the information here, sir.
And it seems that Claude Skelton Klein, when the Financial Secretary wasn't available, Claude Skelton Klein, as Managing Director of the Ports Authority, would chair that negotiation committee. Is that right?
Again, I'm trying to understand your question. The financial sector is absorbed in a number of matters and noted a decision had been made to have Mr. Claude Skelton Klein act in his place whenever he could not make it. Those are my statements.
Yes.
And what are you asking me now, sir?
Well, I'm asking you to confirm whether it's right from what you said in 2014 that your evidence in 2014 was that when the Financial Secretary was not available to chair the negotiation committee, Claude Skelton Klein would do so.
Based on the information here, I would have to conclude that that is what happened.
Could you go to the report itself, please?
Which one?
The Public Accounts Committee report.
Oh. Public Accounts Committee report.
Paragraph,
Talking about this document, sir?
paragraph 44, please.
Paragraph 44. I'm there.
Now, I'm taking you to the conclusion, or one of the conclusions that was reached by the Public Accounts Committee. And what they say is the procurement process engaged by the Ministry of Finance for the development of the cruise pier project was flawed as it created an unfair bias towards TPP submittal and rendered other prospective tenderers at an immediate and severe disadvantage. And if we go over, it excluded the Port Authority Board, which was largely kept out of the process. At 45, the committee records that it also concluded that the Ministry of Finance infringed on the authority's independence by engaging and controlling the tender process for a project which is properly under the control of the BVI Port Authority. Now, were those conclusions that the Ministry of Finance was prepared to accept?
Commissioner, as I said to you before, the first time I'm seeing this document was the 2nd of July. I am not in a position to give a statement as what the Ministry of Finance position would be at this time. I think it would be unfair to me to answer your question. I want to try to be as helpful as possible, but I find it very difficult for me. I think your question is somewhat misleading to me. So I can't say what the Ministry of Finance position was. The Ministry of Finance position would have to be articulated by the Financial Secretary, not by the Deputy Financial Secretary.
Well, let's break it down, Mr. Gaskin, and put it this way. You gave evidence to the Public Accounts Committee.
Yes.
Public Accounts Committee published. Can I finish, please, Mr. Gaskin?
No problem.
The Public Accounts Committee published its report on the 13th of June 2014. That report made criticisms of you as the Deputy Financial Secretary. Those criticisms were aired in the House of Assembly. Are you saying that you didn't at that time see a copy of the report in which you were criticized?
So the answer is yes.
And you were still, at the time of publication of the report in June 2014, Deputy Financial Secretary, were you not?
Yes, sir.
And are you saying that you were not privy to any internal discussions in the Ministry of Finance about the content of this report?
No, sir.
You took no part in any such discussions?
I took no part in any such discussion.
Even though you had told the Public Accounts Committee that you had been the person that had led on the cruise pier project?
Can you repeat your question?
I read out to you a little earlier.
Yes, you did.
Your evidence where you explained to the Public Accounts Committee that you had been the person leading on the cruise pier project whilst the Financial Secretary dealt with the airports project. So even though that was your role, after this report was published, you were not privy to any internal discussions?
No, sir, I was not.
So we just looked at two significant criticisms that were made of the Ministry of Finance and the way it had procured a project worth between $50 and $70 million. And are you saying that the Financial Secretary did not ask for your view on those criticisms?
I can't recall that, sir.
Well, if doesn't it follow from your earlier answer that if you were not privy to those discussions, that the Financial Secretary must not have asked you for your view about how to respond to these criticisms?
So as I said to you before, the first I became aware of this document was July 2nd of 2021. I cannot at this time recall the Financial Secretary asking me any question in regards to what the conclusion of the Public Accounts Committee.
Were you aware that the report had been published? The report's dated 13th of June 2014. At about that time, did you become aware that the report was published?
No, sir.
The report was debated in the House. Did you become aware that it had been debated in the House?
I became aware that it was debated in the House when it was debated in the House. And that was in whenever. And so therefore, again, in a small country like this where we live in a fishbowl, I don't wish to take my family and myself back through the court of public opinion. And so the matter was debated in the House of Assembly, which I have no privilege there, none whatsoever. And that's what I can recall. But otherwise than that, there was no discussion with me.
And did you at any time ask to see a copy of the report?
No, sir.
I do have more questions on it, Mr. Gaskin, but it assist the Commissioner.
No problem.
If given what you've just said about what access you had to the report and the extent that you were able to input into any response to it, which seems to be you were not invited to, if that, can you make that clear to the Commissioner as we go through so that we do know what you were involved in and what you were not involved in at the time? All right.
Go ahead.
Okay, if you go in the report to paragraph 46.
I'm there.
This is the Public Accounts Committee criticizing the Ministry of Finance for not being efficient, because it says that the Ministry of Finance procurement process, after a year of assessment and negotiations, resulted in a failure to execute a contract for the project and a liability for the Port Authority in excess of $1.7 million. Now, we've gone through the different stages in which you were involved and when the financial secretary were involved. Can you help the commissioner at all to understand why, after a year of assessment and negotiations, there was a failure to execute a contract?
So I can't recall that. So I would be no help to you at all.
If you go through the report, please, to paragraph 58.
58.
Sorry, paragraph 55, please. Page 16, Commissioner.
I'm there.
One of the issues that the Public Accounts Committee's report highlighted was that there was a growing use of consultants over a two-year period. And this is a criticism made of the Ministry of Communication and Works, as well as the Ministry of Finance. And they say that there was a lack of transparency about the process. If you look at 57, the committee noted that the protocols for effective financial management require projects to take the form of public-private partnerships to undergo an appraisal process before the procurement stage and be subject to external and independent specialist advice in areas such as accounting, legal, financial, and environmental implications. Now, can you remember, at least from the point of view in which the Ministry of Finance took over the project, at what stage that appraisal process occurred?
I cannot recall that. So you're asking me to go back in the recesses of my memory. I can't recall that.
That's a fair point. I was hoping, and if you can't remember, you must say so, Mr. Gaskin. I'm just hoping that because it was such a large project that there may be some things about it that stayed in your memory. But if you look at 58 on that page, what the criticism is there were effectively too many consultants engaged, and they list the number of consultants involved over into the next page. When and obviously it's not just in relation to the Ministry of Finance, but focusing on the Ministry of Finance, in the aftermath of this project, did you, as the Ministry of Finance, look back and think that there were too many consultants involved in this process?
Commissioner, let us get real here. The BVI government is trying to get involved in a project that they have no knowledge of. So they went out and seek all the help that they could to develop this project. It simply means that nobody was going to come and do it for free. I can't make that assumption.
So you don't agree with the Public Accounts?
No, I don't.
Just you make the point that this is the kind of project where you need to go out and get assistance.
You need to get capacity.
In getting the capacity, I mean, we have here Baker McKenzie lawyers specializing in public-private partnerships, PricewaterhouseCoopers as accountants, and BDO accountants and auditors were also retained. Do you remember whether, when seeking these specialists, the matter was put out to competitive tendering?
I can't recall that, sir.
Do you remember how they became involved at all? How did Baker and McKenzie get selected?
Commissioner, I can't recall how any one of them got selected. All I can say is, Commissioner, the BVI government was embarking on a major project. You made it clear, a project that's supposed to be either 50 to 75 million dollars. I'm not sure where you got that figure from, but if we don't have the capacity on island, I think it would be very prudent of the BVI government to go out and seek those people who can assist them with such a project. And I think while that may come off as a criticism, I don't look at it as a criticism. I look at that the Ministry of Finance was acting prudently and making sure that we try to do whatever is required to make sure that all the people who are involved had some knowledge about what they were doing.
My question, Mr. Gaskin, was not related to whether it was a prudent step to get a specialist, but whether in doing so, the Ministry of Finance decided to invite more than one specialist to bid for the work. But that's something you can't remember.
No.
Whether it happened or not.
No.
Could you take a look, please, at 68 in the same?
68. I'm there.
One of the points, and it's under the heading conclusion, but can you see B?
The payment of success fee?
Yeah. And this was in relation to loan funding. So the payment of a success fee to PricewaterhouseCoopers was unnecessary expense and a burden to the authority. And what it says is sourcing of loan funding for the development is the one aspect of the process which should properly have been assisted or overseen by the financial secretary or his designate on the board, who were already armed with a mass of reports from the various consultancies previously engaged. Now, in terms of sourcing of loan funding, was that ever a task that was assigned to you?
I can't recall that, sir.
Can you recall having any involvement with sourcing of loan funding at all?
I can't recall, sir.
Was that something that, given your professional background and your experience, that you could have dealt with?
So I thank you for the compliment, but at this level, I wouldn't have indicated that was my area of specialty.
And so, as the person who is sitting on the board, is your evidence effectively that it would have been a justifiable use of Pricewaterhouse?
It would have been, to me, it would have been, sir.
Thank you. If you go, please, to paragraph 84.
I'm there, sir.
Ultimately, as it says, the tender and negotiation process administered by the Ministry of Finance extended for more than a year, with the selection of a proposal from Tortola Port Partners of $74 million, $74.5 million. But then you say, what's recorded by the committee is the company's failure to meet preconditions would lead to termination of the process in September 2013 and return of the project to the BVI Port Authority. Can you remember now at all, Mr. Gaskin, why or how it came about that TPP failed to meet preconditions?
Sir, I'm not in a position to recall that at all.
By then, as part, and it's just the procurement process that involves the Ministry of Science, would there have been expenditure of costs?
So again, as I said, I can't recall.
If you go through then to firstly, let's take it to paragraphs 108 in that report.
108.
Yeah.
108. I'm there.
This is a section headed ongoing and recurring parties, alliances and interests. But hopefully I can try and summarize it, that what the Public Accounts Committee raised as a concern was that there were ongoing associations with between private parties and public officers who served in multiple capacities on this project. And they give consultant, managing director, board members, tender committee, negotiation committee amongst them. And they say that those associations were lending themselves and the process to the possibility corrupting the decision-making process and improperly influencing the project's outcome. Their conclusion at 111 is impartiality in decision-making can be compromised or otherwise adversely affected when individuals are allowed to serve in multiple capacities at various stages of the projects. This presents potential for conflict of interest and motivation, particularly if the association between the parties is ongoing, as was the situation with the cruise ship port development project. Now, distilling that down, and you can, it comes to this, Mr. Gaskin, and that's taking you back, I know, in time, but there you were, the Ministry of Finance representative on the board, the person attending board meetings. When the Ministry of Finance took over the project, you had a role, you were involved, as we've seen from the Auditor General's report, not only in sitting on the board, but also in overseeing at least the first committee involved in it. At the time, how were you dealing with potential conflicts of interest?
Sir, Commissioner, I only can speak for Wendell M. Gaskin at this point. I am not aware of any conflict of interest being a party to myself or anybody else. I can't recall those. So I only could speak for Wendell Gaskin at this time. I am a certified fraud examiner, and I try to stay away from anything that may have issues in regards to those kind of issues. I've been a certified fraud examiner for 20 years. I wish to let the record show that I don't agree with those conclusions.
But as I understand your evidence, Mr. Gaskin, you didn't recognize any potential conflicts of interest in this, either in you or indeed anybody else?
No, sir.
Thank you.
In terms of the extract that's been printed out for you, Mr. Gaskin, from the PA's, the Public Accounts Committee bundle, is it just the report and the minute of your evidence?
It's yes, sir. That's it. The minutes of my evidence and the report. And then you send me this other one this morning.
All right. Well, I want to read to you from the minutes of the evidence of the Sonia Webster, the Auditor General, which was on Wednesday, the 15th of January, 2014. And Commissioner, that's at your page 39. It starts at 37. If I take you through to 39.
And which paragraph number is it?
B.
No, thank you very much.
I didn't hear the paragraph reference.
The paragraph reference is paragraph 10.
Thank you.
Paragraph 10.
Printed off for you. Have you got the Auditor General's minute, the minute of her evidence?
No.
Right, well, let me read it out to you, because I want to, it's to give you context for something in the report that I want to take you to.
No problem.
Paragraph 10 reads as follows. The member for the 1st District inquired about which senior officer at the Ministry of Finance was assigned to deal with the staff of the Office of the Auditor General, and also inquired as to whether they were cooperative or not. The Auditor General indicated that the senior officer was the Deputy Financial Secretary, Mr. Wendell Gaskin. At 12, reads as follows. The member for the 1st District asked if she had found him to be cooperative. 13, the Auditor General stated that Mr. Gaskin's demeanour was not welcoming to her staff, and that he had instructed his staff at the Ministry of Finance that they should not give anything to the Office of the Auditor General unless it goes through him. The Auditor General further stated that the Auditor General staff was not well received at the time. The member for the 1st District asked if, in the view of the Auditor General, the uncooperative behaviour of the Ministry of Finance required disciplinary action, seeing that similar concerns were raised in the Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited correspondence to the Governor. The Auditor General indicated she was not sure if there was a provision anywhere that stated that disciplinary action was required. She further stated she had written to the Financial Secretary and had complained about the lack of cooperation. She noted that he was aware that the Deputy Financial Secretary was not fully cooperative with the audit being done on the project. I'm going to pause there. If I take you now with that context to paragraphs 47 in the report itself.
47?
Yes.
I'm there.
Now, I'm not going to...
Excuse me, sir. This one or the other one?
No, the other one, the Public Accounts Committee report, please, Mr. Gaskin.
Okay. 47. I'm there.
I won't read it all out, Mr. Gaskin, but to summarize it, at 47, the Public Accounts Committee speaks of the process as having consistently lacked transparency in its processes and decision-making. And they then go at 50. They record that the Auditor General reported that in her examination of the project, her office encountered an absence of transparency, withholding of information, and lack of forthrightness from the Ministry of Finance when sourcing information on the cruise ship port development. If you go to their conclusions at 52,
I'm there, 52.
it records there, the committee found that there was a concerted effort on the part of the minister, whether by intention or through lack of knowledge of government processes, and later the Ministry of Finance, to obscure information regarding the processes undertaken on this project. Now what is suggested there is that, and this is by the Public Accounts Committee, that there was a failure on the part of the Ministry of Finance to cooperate with the Auditor General. Was that, were you aware of that allegation being made or that criticism being made of you and others in the Ministry of Finance at the time?
No, sir, and I don't accept that criticism.
So if you are a former auditor yourself.
Yeah, we would have made all the necessary arrangement to give the auditor the information that she requested.
So is your position that you would have cooperated with the Auditor General?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Gaskin, you've spoken of the passage of time, and how that affects memory. Just to make it clear, despite that passage of time, is it your position that you did cooperate with the Auditor General?
It is my position that the Ministry of Finance cooperated with the Auditor General.
But the point that is made is that you were the person assigned to liaise with the Auditor General, and you instructed staff not to cooperate, except through you.
What are you asking me, sir?
Well, the reason I want to be clear about your evidence is because you're named by the Auditor General as being uncooperative.
Sir, once again, I think that it is safe to say that, again, as I only saw this report on July 2nd, 2021, I am not sure the context in which that assertion was made. But again, my position is that the Ministry of Finance would have done all necessary to cooperate with the Auditor General.
I can take you back to the report if you want, but one concern that was, and this is the Auditor General's report, one concern that she raised, and this is at paragraph 59 of her report. 59. If you want to look at it, so it's not the PAC, it's the other one. Page 629.
629. Yes, go ahead.
Now, if you find paragraph 59, please, Mr. Gaskin.
I'm there.
What's the point that's made there, and this is overseeing the procurement process, is that part of the invitation request to potential tenderers was that there should be opportunity for at least 20% of local ownership in the venture. And so any potential tenderers had to indicate in their proposal who the local partners were. If you go over to the next page, you'll see that it's the last line of paragraph 59 on page 630, the submission by Tortolo Port Partners named the BVI Investment Club as its local partner. And the Auditor General raised that as potentially giving rise to an issue of conflict of interest. Now, if you go back to 629.
629.
You have at 54 the process in which you were involved. Do you remember we were talking about the two committees?
59 or 69?
No, 54.
54? Go ahead. I'm there.
Now,
the submission were reviewed?
Yes. So there seems to be a stage process. Invitations are requested, submissions are received, a committee you chair review it, and subsequently to that, there is a second committee chaired by the Financial Secretary. Now, at the time that you were chairing that committee and considering the submissions, including one from Tortolo Port Partners, were you aware of this link to the BVI Investment Club?
So I can't recall that, sir. A point though. I am here answering questions that the Auditor General testimony. And my attorney is sitting here and can't cross-examine.
I'm sorry.
So that puts me at a disadvantage because the Auditor General have already gave testimony. I am here today to try to assist in the matter. I am telling you that the question that you are asking me, I can't recall whether there was conflict of interest. I indicated to you from before. I I'm not a party to any conflict of interest that knowingly that I know of. My lawyer sitting here, he can't ask a question because of the rules of the commission.
Well,
So therefore, the Auditor General have already given her testimony. He can't cross-examine because I see no evidence to point out those things.
well, can we break that down a little, please, Mr. Gaskin?
No problem, sir.
Firstly, I'm not suggesting that you were an investor in the BVI Investment Club.
Oh, I'm not.
Right. Well, and I'll take you in a moment to the part of the Public Accounts Committee report that will explain, I hope, clarify for you why I drew your attention to this. Secondly, there is no dispute that the Tortola Port Partners had local partners in the BVI Investment Club. My question to you was, at the time that you were chairing the committee, were you aware of that local connection between TPC and the BVI Investment Club?
And my answer is that I cannot recall whether or not that is so.
In terms of your lawyer being able to cross-examine, he can't cross-examine you. If he wishes to ask questions, he can make an application under the rules. And if you wish to say that there are other matters to be put to the Auditor General, then that is a matter that you can make an application to the Commissioner for. But can I take you to why I drew your attention to this? And it's at paragraphs 114 to 117 of the Public Accounts Committee's report.
114?
Yes.
No problem. 114. I'm there.
Right. I'm not going to read it out, Mr. Gaskin, but I'm going to invite you to read it to yourself. If you want me to read it out, I will.
Which one do you want me to read?
Well, read from 114 down to 119.
114 to 119.
Yes.
And your question is, sir?
Well, my question was, and you may be able to answer it, but in relation to the BVI Investment Club, do you remember any discussion that they were named as the prospective local partner for Tortola Port Partners?
I can't recall that, sir, but based on what it's saying here, it is saying on 115, the Deputy Financial Secretary, Mr. Gaskin, who served for the port procurement process, was asked by the members of the public, and he replied in the negative and stated that there was nothing to suggest a connection.
And if you read on,
yes,
the committee was critical of that answer, weren't they?
Yes, they were critical of that answer.
And in fact, they
in 18 in the conclusion, they are concluding that I was deliberate and knowingly furnished false information. Again, I don't see the evidence.
Well, that was a conclusion of the committee. It's not a conclusion of the commission.
No, I know.
That was Mr. Gaskin.
Go ahead, sir.
That was the reason why I phrased my question in the way that I did. What my question was whether at the time you were sitting on that first committee, you were aware of the BVI Investment Club.
I cannot recall, sir.
Now, what the committee called for was disciplinary action against you, didn't it?
I am seeing that in the document, sir.
Well, were you aware whether aside from the report, there were any other calls for disciplinary action?
No, sir.
So do you recall if when the report was debated in the House of Assembly, there were any calls for action to be taken against you?
I can't recall that, sir.
Were you in fact, as a result of this committee's report, subject to any such action?
No, sir. Not that I'm aware of, sir.
Well, hopefully, if you had been subject to it, someone might have made you aware of it. But did you then subsequently continue in your role as Deputy Financial Secretary?
Until I retired in 2018.
And since retiring, have you occupied any other roles in the public sector? For example, serving on a statutory board?
Since I retired?
Yes.
I think when I retired, I became the chairman of the Port Authority. That's the before I retired, I think I was a member of the college board, and I became chairman of the Port Authority.
Can you help us with this? When you're on the college board, is that again as an ex officio member because you're still in public service?
No, I think that I was a member in my own right.
But certainly in relation to, as we've discussed earlier, the Ports Authority Board, you started off as an ex officio member.
No. Once again, the only person that is an ex officio member would be the financial secretary. I would sit in those meetings in his stead when he could not make it.
I see. So you served up until retirement on the Port Authority Board as the proxy for the financial secretary?
Yes, sir.
And then having retired at that point, you were able, having left public service, to take on the role of chair of the Ports Authority?
For a short while, sir.
The Commissioner is aware of public reports that you are returning to a role in the Ministry of Finance. Is that right?
As a consultant, sir.
And how did that come about?
When you say how did that come about, what do you mean, sir?
Who approached you to become a consultant in the Ministry of Finance?
Nobody approached me on becoming a consultant in the Ministry of Finance. I believe that the Ministry of Finance, which I worked for a number of years, could use my services. And I wrote to them asking them, I wrote several proposals to not only to the Ministry of Finance, I wrote to the Deputy Governor, I wrote to the Port Authority, I wrote to the Airport Authority, I wrote to the Tourist Board, I wrote to everybody and offering my services.
As a consultant? As a consultant. And in relation to, you're going to be a consultant to the Ministry of Finance. I mean, who approves your role as consultant? I mean,
the financial secretary.
So it's the financial secretary that determines you would get a consultancy contract?
No, I'm not sure who would determine that, but I know that the Ministry of Finance, the accounting officer, is the financial secretary.
Okay. Just give me one moment, please, Mr. Gaskin.
No problem.
Commissioner, I've reached the conclusion of my questions. Can I conclude firstly by thanking Mr. Gaskin for his time today, and secondly for the way in which he has given his evidence. Thank you, Mr. Gaskin.
Yes, Mr. Gaskin, can I echo that? Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your patience in giving evidence today rather than yesterday when it was first planned. And thank you for the clear way in which you've given your evidence. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you too to Mr. Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels.
Take my leave, please.
Mr. Rowett.
That actually concludes the business for the day, Commissioner. We are hoping that we may be able to schedule a further hearing on Monday. that's still being arranged at the moment. So well, as soon as we have a firm position, we will then publish the details on the inquiry's website.
Good, thank you very much.